The November wind came down off the Medicine Bow Range like a whetted blade. It slipped through warped clapboards, lifted street dust, and scattered it along the wooden porches of Larkspur, a frontier town that clung to the prairie like a row of weary bones. The wind found Emma Harper as she stepped down from the stage, her black dress dulled to ash gray, her boots scuffed from miles of travel. At her side, 10-year-old Cal clutched a threadbare canvas sack, their last possession. Worth carrying. They tried the boarding house first. Mrs. Pender looked her up and down, eyes catching on the black ribbon of mourning. "Not taking in strangers," she said curtly. "Try the church." The church had turned them away in Cheyenne, Green River, and every town between. Emma held her chin steady, but she felt the weight of doors closing at the general store. Mr. Hollis was kinder, but he too shook his head. "Work's scarce, ma'am. Maybe ask the pastor." By the time they reached the Silver Dollar Saloon, the piano inside stumbled through a half-hearted waltz. Emma pulled Cal close, meaning to pass by, when a knot of cowhands spilled through the swinging doors. Whiskey shone in their eyes. One stepped directly into her path. "Well, well," he drawled, reeking of liquor. "Little bird all alone." Emma steadied her voice. "We're only passing through." "Passing through Ruby's saloon, maybe." Another smirked. "Your kind won't last long elsewhere." Before Emma could tug Cal away, hoofbeats rang sharp on the street. A rider appeared, moving with deliberate ease. His horse, a chestnut Moray, slowed to a halt. A man swung down, dust rising around him. He was tall, shoulders broad beneath a worn trail coat, his hat brim shadowing eyes, pale as winter dusk. "Afternoon," he said quietly, voice carrying like a creek under ice. "Looks to me like you're blocking the lady's way." The cowhands sneered. One spat. "Ain't your concern, Whitlock?" The name carried weight. Even Cal stiffened. James Whitlock, owner of the largest ranch south of Medicine Bow, a man as wealthy as he was solitary. People whispered he was quick with a colt, quicker still to mind his own business. Yet here he was. Whitlock shifted, hand resting near his revolver, but not drawing it. Sunlight glinted off the barrel, just enough to remind them it was there. "Her path is hers," he said, calm but unyielding. "Not yours." The cowhands hesitated. Their bluster faltered under that still, cold gaze. Muttering curses, they backed off into the shadows of the saloon. Emma released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you, Mr. Whitlock." "James," he corrected. His eyes flicked to Cal. "The boy, all right?" Cal, bristling with pride, asked instead, "What's your horse's name?" A ghost of a smile tugged at James's mouth. "Sable. Want to ride him?" "Cal," Emma warned, but James only shook his head. "Later." He turned back to her. "You've no place to stay. No one will rent to us." She forced her voice steady. "I cook, sew, teach. Cal can tend stock. We need honest work, that's all." James studied her for a long moment. In her straight shoulders he saw an echo of Clara, the wife he'd buried under frozen earth. In the boy's clenched jaw he saw the shadow of his own lost child. His voice was rough when he spoke again. "I've got work," he said. "And space. Whitlock Ranch is 10 miles south. Pays fair. Room of your own. Safe locks on the door. It's been empty too long." Emma blinked. "Why help us? You don't know me." His gaze went distant. "Once a stranger helped me through a winter storm. Seems fair I pass it on." Cal's eyes shone. Emma tightened her grip on his hand, but she heard herself answer, "If you're certain." "I'm always certain." James lifted her canvas bag as though it weighed nothing. "Come on, snow's close." The ride out carried them across seas of prairie grass, rolling gold, under a bruised sky. Antelope darted from the sage. The ranch emerged against the horizon. A broad-roofed house, a weathered barn, corrals scattered like rough dice. Smoke curled from the chimney. Abner, the wiry old foreman, came to meet them. His sharp eyes flicked over Emma and Cal, then to the bag. In James's hand, "Storm following you home, boss?" "Storm can cook," James said dryly. "East rooms clean?" Abner grunted approval. Inside, Emma found the house spare but tended, the air faint with wood smoke. A child's rocking horse still sat by. The hearth, its paint worn smooth. Her heart clenched. She busied herself with the kitchen, boiling beans, slicing bacon, baking cornbread. The smell filled the silent house like sunlight after rain-dotted supper. James ate with quiet focus, as though rediscovering flavor. "Wages come Saturdays," he said at last. "Chores are plain: cooking, mending, keeping books. Call Shadow. Abner, everyone here carries a gun. Use it only if you must." Emma met his eyes. "I know how to shoot." "Not fast, but straight enough," Abner snorted. "Fast don't matter if you don't miss." That night, wind prowled the eaves, carrying the promise of snow. Emma tucked Cal into the side room, then lingered at her own window. The prairie stretched endless, silvered by moonlight. From the parlor drifted the faint creak of a rocking chair. Whitlock, keeping watch by the fire, a lonely sentinel. She thought of the saloon cowhands, of the disdain in Mrs. Pender's eyes, of the hunger that had shadowed Cal's face these last months. Here, at least for tonight, they were safe. A sudden shriek split the stillness, a horse screaming from the barn. Emma snatched the Spencer rifle from its rack by the door and raced outside. James was already in the yard, Colt in hand, eyes sharp. Abner ran with a lantern, Cal trailing behind. The scent hit Emma's nose. Kerosene. Flames licked up from a hay pile, fed by spilled oil. James darted toward a fleeing shadow. "Stop!" he barked. The figure, a bearded cowhand from town, clutched another kerosene bottle. Emma raised the Spencer, heart hammering. She squeezed the trigger. The shot shattered the bottle, kerosene splashing harmlessly into dirt. The man howled, clutching his wrist, and vanished into the dark. James turned, surprise flashing in his pale eyes. Then he nodded once. "Good shot." Together they fought the fire, hauling water, smothering flames until only smoking ash remained. Their breaths steamed in the night. "They'll be back," James said grimly, scanning the prairie shadows. "But next time they'll find more guns waiting." Emma met his gaze, chest still heaving. "We're not running." Something eased in his face. He gave a small, solemn nod. "Then tomorrow we begin like winter will last forever. And if they want it longer—" He thumbed back the hammer of his Colt, eyes cold as mountain stone. "We can wait." The wind shifted, bringing the scent of snow. And under that cold Wyoming sky, a fragile alliance was forged, out of fire, out of defiance, out of one woman's quiet vow: "I will stay." The first snow came heavy that night, thick flakes cloaking the barn roof and drifting against the corral rails. By morning, Larkspur Valley lay hushed under white, the cottonwoods brittle with frost, the air sharp as broken glass. Inside the ranch house, the fire burned low. Emma stirred it back to life, her hands still raw from fighting flames the night before. Across the room, Cal snored softly under a quilt. She paused, listening. The silence was different now, not empty, but waiting. From the porch, boots creaked. James Whitlock stepped in, hat dusted with snow, Colt on his hip. He moved with that slow, deliberate ease she was learning to recognize as habit, every step measured, every glance purposeful. "They left tracks," he said simply, hanging up his coat. 2 men, maybe 3, rode east before the storm. Covered him. Will they come back? Emma asked. They will. His pale eyes flicked toward her, steady but unreadable. That fire wasn't meant to kill. It was a warning. Whoever sent them wanted me nervous. Emma folded her arms. Then they miscalculated. We're still here. Something like approval flickered across his face, though fleeting. He busied himself with the rifle rack, checking the Spencer she'd fired. You shoot straight, he said finally. Where'd you learn? Emma hesitated. My husband, Thomas, he taught me. Said a woman alone out here needed more than prayer. He. She stopped, the words catching. James's hand stilled on the rifle barrel. How long? 6 months, she whispered. The mine at Bisbee, timber supports gave way, crushed him. The company called it an accident, but Thomas wrote me letters. He knew it was coming. Holloway, the owner, wouldn't pay for repairs. The name stirred something in James. His jaw tightened, as though chewing on memory. He poured coffee into a tin cup and set it in front of her. Drink. Warm helps. Emma wrapped her hands around it. After Thomas died, the company threw. U.S. out. Company house, company store. They took everything. Cal and I, we walked, rode wagons when we could. Every door we knocked on stayed shut. Until yours. James said nothing. His gaze drifted toward the mantel, where a child's rocking horse sat gathering dust. Emma followed his eyes. You had a family. The words hung heavy. At last, James answered, voice low, as though dragged from a deep well. Clara, my wife. Little girl named Annie. Fever took them 3 winters back. Nothing I did mattered. No doctor could reach us through the snow. By the time the thaw came, he stopped, throat working. I buried them up by the pines. Silence filled the room, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Emma reached across the table, her hand brushing his. He didn't move, but neither did he pull away. You keep their things, she said gently. They remind me what I lost, James murmured, and what I don't intend to lose again. By midday, Abner returned from town, snow still in his beard. He stomped his boots and set a folded newspaper on the table. Sheriff's boys were sniffing around, asking who Whitlock's sheltering. They don't like strangers. James unfolded the paper. On the back page, in crude ink, a notice declared, landowners in the Medicine Bow region are hereby warned. Those who resist sale will face consequence. Signed, Watson and Co. Emma's stomach turned. Watson? Abner spat into the fire. Sheriff Eli Watson. Owns half the saloons and all the trouble. He's been buying up land cheap, folks who won't sell. Barns burn, wells sour, herds vanish. Same story every time. Emma's mind reeled. That's exactly what happened in Bisbee. Wells poisoned. Barn fires. All blamed on bad luck until families were forced out. James's face hardened, eyes cold as winter stone. Then it's no coincidence. Abner looked between them. Boss, you know what this means. If you stand against Watson, you'll paint a target big as the Tetons on this ranch. James's reply was simple. Then let him aim. That evening, as snow fell steady outside, Emma cooked beans and cornbread. Cal peppered Abner with questions about cattle drives, while James sat silent by the fire, lost in thought. Later, as she cleared dishes, Emma felt his gaze. You could still leave, James said quietly. Stage goes east tomorrow. No one would blame you. Emma set the plates down harder than she meant. Leave? After last night? After you gave us shelter? My husband used to say running only feeds the wolves. I've had enough of running. 4. The first time, James almost smiled. Not soft, but something lighter in the shadows of his face. Then tomorrow, he said. "We ride into town. Time you saw who we're up against." That night, as the fire burned low, Emma lay awake listening. To the wind. Across the hall, she heard James pacing slow, measured steps, the tread of a man who carried ghosts. She closed her eyes, clutching the quilt, and made herself a promise. If Watson wanted to fight, he'd chosen the wrong widow. The snow had stopped by dawn, leaving Larkspur Valley silvered in frost. Smoke curled from the ranch chimney, soft against the pale sky. Emma stood on the porch, wrapping her shawl tighter, watching James saddle the horses. He moved with the same steady precision she'd seen the night before, every strap pulled taut, every knot exact. A man who left nothing to chance. "You don't have to come," James said, adjusting the cinch on his big bay gelding Caesar. "Town isn't kind to strangers, less so to widows." Emma lifted her chin. "I've faced worse than stares. If Watson is behind this, I want to see him with my own eyes." For a moment, James's pale gaze held hers, unreadable as always. Then he gave a short nod. "Mount up." The ride into Pine Bluffs was silent, save for the crunch of hooves on frozen earth. The town came into view nestled against low hills. A scattering of false front buildings, smoke rising from chimneys, the faint sound of a blacksmith's hammer carrying on the air. To Emma, it felt both promising and perilous. A place where hope and danger walked the same boardwalk dot as they entered. Heads turned. A woman in widow's weeds riding beside James Whitlock drew eyes like moths to flame. Curtains twitched. A few men outside the saloon muttered to one another. Emma kept her gaze forward, though her cheeks burned. James dismounted first, tying Caesar to the rail. He helped her down with a hand roughened by years of work, his grip firm and certain. She felt steadier than she expected. "Stay close," he murmured. The general store smelled of kerosene and flour dust. Shelves sagged with tins and sacks, while the proprietor, a rotund man with mutton chops, eyed them as though calculating their worth. "What can I do for you, Whitlock?" he asked, voice flat. "Supplies," James said. "Coffee, flour, cartridges." The man hesitated, gaze sliding to Emma. "And who's the lady?" "My housekeeper," James replied smoothly. Emma bit her tongue, letting the lie pass. Better. That then feeding the town's gossip dot as James listed items, Emma wandered to the back, studying bolts of calico. Her fingertips brushed a faded blue pattern, and memory rushed in. Thomas's laugh as he bought her cloth in Bisbee, saying she'd make the drabbest dress look fine. The ache in her chest nearly buckled her, but she forced herself steady. Was when the door swung open. Boots clattered on the boards. A hush fell over the store sheriff, Eli Watson, filled the doorway. He was a lean man with a hawk's nose and eyes the color of cold steel. His star gleamed bright on his chest, but his smile was all teeth and threat. 2 deputies flanked him, both broad-shouldered and armed. "Well, well," Watson drawled, stepping inside. James Whitlock finally crawls down from his mountain. "And what's this?" His gaze raked over Emma, lingering too long. "You've brought company." Emma stood tall, refusing to flinch. "Emma Harper," she said clearly. "Widow. Widow, eh?" Watson's smile widened. "This town's not hospitable to your kind. Stray women stir up trouble. Men get ideas. Better for everyone if you keep moving." James stepped forward, his bulk between them. His voice was low, calm, but edged with iron. "She's under my protection." A murmur rippled through the few townsfolk inside. Watson's eyes narrowed. "Protection, is it? From what, Whitlock? Life out here's hard enough without you making it harder, taking in strays." "She's got a boy," James said. "She stays." Watson's smile vanished, leaving only sharpness. "You're already on thin ice, Whitlock. Folks here don't. Forget you wore Union blue. Some don't forgive it. You cross me, and I won't lift a finger when trouble finds you." Emma's temper, frayed by weeks of rejection, snapped. "Trouble doesn't find people, Sheriff. Men like you send it." The store went dead silent. Even James froze for a breath, eyes flicking toward her with something between warning and admiration. Watson's face darkened. He stepped close, his breath sour with tobacco. "Careful, widow. Around here, words can get you buried." James moved faster than thought, shifting between them. His hand hovered near his Colt. His voice, low and steady, carried more weight than shouting ever could. "She said her piece. Now you've said yours. That's enough." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other, predator to predator. Then Watson laughed softly, stepping back. "Enjoy your stay, Whitlock, while it lasts." He tipped his hat mockingly at Emma and strode out, deputies on his heels. The store exhaled as if a storm had passed. The proprietor busied himself with the ledger, not meeting their eyes. Emma's hands trembled as she gathered her shawl. "He meant it," she whispered. "He'll come for us." James tightened the cinch on his supplies. His face was carved stone. "Then let him come." They left town under a sky bruised with dusk, the prairie stretching endless around them. Emma rode close beside James, her heart still pounding. For the first time, she understood the depth of the fight ahead. Watson wasn't just a crooked sheriff. He was a vulture feeding on fear, and now he'd marked them both. And yet, as she glanced at the man riding steady at her side, Emma felt something else bloom beneath the fear. Resolve. Whatever storm Sheriff Watson brought, she would not face it alone. The wind cut sharp across the prairie as James and Emma rode back from Pine Bluffs. Snow clouds massed over the distant peaks, their bellies swollen with another storm. Neither spoke much. The tension of Watson's warnings still clung like smoke. After a fire, when the ranch finally came into view, Emma exhaled, relief easing the tight coil in her chest. She swung down from her horse stiffly, brushing frost from her skirts. Cal ran out from the barn where Abner was teaching him to mend. Tack, his face bright. "Ma, did you see the town? Did you buy sweets?" Emma forced a smile. "Not this time, darling." She hugged him fiercely, as though to shield him from the memory of the sheriff's eyes. James unloaded supplies in silence, his movements taut with thought. Later, by the fire, Emma found him staring into the flames, jaw set. "He won't stop," James said. His voice was low, certain. "Watson's not a man to let insults lie. He'll come harder next time." Emma clasped her hands too. Still they're trembling. "Then what do we do?" James turned to her, eyes pale and unwavering. "We make it so you're untouchable." 2 mornings later, James saddled Caesar before dawn. "You'll ride with me," he told Emma. "Wear your best dress." She blinked. At him. "Where are we going?" "To town," he said simply. "To the courthouse." Fear rippled through her. James, after what happened, all the more reason. His gaze softened just slightly. "If Watson thinks you're alone, he'll hound you till you break. If the town sees you tied to me, he'll think twice." Emma's breath caught. "You mean—" "I mean marriage, Emma." His tone was steady, not romantic but resolute, as if he were stating the weather. "A marriage of convenience. It'll give you and the boy a name no one can sneer at. And it'll give me something to fight for that even Watson can't twist." Emma's heart pounded. She thought of Thomas, of the vows they had shared, of the grave left behind in Bisbee. Then she looked at James, scarred by war, hollowed by grief, yet standing tall before her, offering protection and something more. "Is this truly what you want?" She whispered. James didn't flinch. "I want you safe. If this is the way, then yes." The ride back into town was like walking into a hornet's nest. Eyes followed them on the boardwalk, as James dismounted and helped Emma down. She felt every stare, every whispered word. Widow Harper, in her faded black dress, standing beside the notorious James Whitlock. They entered the courthouse, its walls echoing with cold authority. Judge Thorne, a stern man with silver hair, looked up as they approached. Whitlock. Widow. Harper, what brings you here? James's voice was steady. We're here to make it official. Marriage license. The words struck the room like a hammer blow. Two clerks paused in their writing. A man sweeping in the corner stopped mid-stroke. Outside, news spread like wildfire. Within minutes, townsfolk crowded the porch, waiting. Emma stood beside James, her hand trembling slightly as she signed her name in the ledger. When James's broad hand scrawled James Whitlock beneath hers, the ink seemed to sear the page with permanence. The ceremony was brief. Judge Thorne read the vows in a voice heavy with formality, yet Emma heard the undercurrent of compassion. Do. You, James Whitlock, take this woman. I do, James said, firm and unshaken. Do you, Emma Harper, take this man? Emma's throat tightened. She thought of Cal, of the barn fire, of Watson's warning. She thought of the grief she had carried alone for months. Then she looked into James's eyes, and for the first time, she felt she wasn't carrying it alone anymore. I do, she whispered. When they stepped outside, the crowd erupted in murmurs. Some shocked, some disapproving, but others nodding in quiet approval. That was when Sheriff Watson appeared. Well, isn't this a sight? He drawled, his voice slicing through the chatter. The lonely widow and the union stray, shackled together in holy matrimony. Emma flinched, but James stood tall, pulling her gently to his side. It's done, Watson, he said, his tone like steel. She's my wife. She carries my name. Now, if you want to lay hands on her, you'll have to go through me. The street fell silent. Watson's eyes narrowed, his jaw twitching. For once, the smile was gone. You've just declared war, Whitlock. James's voice was quiet, but it carried. Then so be it. They rode back to the ranch as the winter sun dipped low, throwing long shadows across the snow. Emma's hand rested lightly on the pommel, but her gaze strayed to James, who rode as if the whole valley now depended on his resolve. Inside her chest, fear and gratitude tangled like threads in a quilt. She had married him for protection, for survival. But somewhere in the fire of that day, something deeper had sparked, something neither Watson's threats nor the winter storms could easily put out. The prairie wore a brittle quiet in the days following the courthouse wedding. Snow still clung to the hollows, the wind cut sharp from the north, and the cattle huddled close against the fences James had reinforced with his own hands. Yet beneath the brittle calm, Emma felt the tension of an unspoken storm drought at first. Life on the ranch moved with the rhythm of ordinary chores. James rose before dawn, splitting logs and checking stock, his breath fogging in the cold. Emma kept the stove burning, baked bread, and taught Cal his letters at the rough-hewn table. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to believe in the simplicity of it all. A home, a hearth, a man whose silence carried comfort instead of judgment. But even in the quiet, reminders of their choice seeped in. One afternoon, as Emma gathered water at the well, she heard hoofbeats on the ridge. She turned, heart lurching, and saw two riders watching from a distance. Neither wore a badge, but both had the unmistakable slouch of hired guns. They didn't approach. They just sat their horses, staring until the sun dipped low, and then melted back into the timber. When she told James, his face hardened. Watson's dogs, he said grimly, testing the ground. Should we tell someone? The judge? The marshal? James shook his head. Watson owns the town for now. Until we've got proof. The law's his plaything. Emma hugged her shawl tighter, glancing at Cal chasing a chicken across the yard. "He won't stop." "No," James admitted, "but neither will I." 2 nights later, the first strike came. It was well after midnight when Emma woke to the acrid smell of smoke. Her heart hammered as she sat up, listening. A faint crackle, then a sudden shout from outside. James was already up, pulling on his boots. "Barn," he barked, grabbing his rifle. Emma snatched Cal from his bed, clutching the boy against her as she hurried after James. Outside, the barn glowed orange, flames licking greedily at the dry timber. The cattle bawled in panic, hooves thundering inside. "Stay back," James roared, sprinting into the blaze. Emma cried out, but he vanished into the smoke. She stood helpless, the fire's heat blistering her face, Cal sobbing into her skirts. Moments stretched into eternity before James reappeared, driving a terrified horse before him, coughing hard. He staggered clear just as part of the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. By dawn, the barn was nothing but blackened ruin. They'd saved a handful of stock, but the rest lay charred in the ashes. Emma found James sitting on the porch, soot streaking his face, his shirt burned at the sleeve. He stared at the smoldering wreckage with a hollow expression. "This is just the beginning," he muttered. Emma touched his arm gently. "Then we fight back." The fire forced James into town, the next day to buy feed and lumber. Emma rode with him. Cal nestled between them on the wagon seat. She felt every eye as they rolled down Main Street, whispers rising like weeds. At the general store, Mr. Garrett greeted them with forced politeness. His hands shook slightly as he weighed flour and beans, and Emma realized he was afraid. Not of her, but of being seen helping her. "Careful, Mr. Whitlock," Garrett said quietly as he wrapped the parcels. "Sheriff's been asking questions. Says folks who side with you might find themselves short on luck." James's jaw tightened, but he only nodded. Appreciate the warning. When they stepped back onto the boardwalk, Watson himself was waiting. The sheriff leaned against a post, arms folded, his bandaged hands still strapped from the courthouse scuffle. His smile was as thin as paper. "Morning, Mrs. Whitlock," he said mockingly. "Or should I say, Mrs. Nobody?" Emma froze, but James stepped in front of her, his shadow swallowing hers. "What do you want, Watson?" "Only to admire your optimism," the sheriff drawled. "Thinking a piece of paper and a judge's blessing makes you untouchable. Shame about that barn. Fires are tricky things this time of year." James's hand flexed near his belt. "Careful what you say." Watson's eyes glinted. "Not a threat, Whitlock, just an observation. You've set yourself against the law in this town, and the law tends to win." He tipped his hat to Emma with mock gallantry, then sauntered off, deputies trailing him like vultures. Emma's hands trembled as she clutched Cal close. "He means to destroy us, James." James's eyes followed Watson until he disappeared into the saloon. Then he spoke with quiet conviction. "Then we'll take the fight to him." That evening, James rode to see Judge Thorne. Emma stayed behind, watching from the porch as his silhouette vanished into the dusk. She tried to busy herself, mending shirts, baking bread, but worry gnawed at her. When James returned hours later, his expression was carved from stone. "Thorne says the marshal won't move without evidence," he told her. "But there are whispers. Other families forced off their land. Wells poisoned. Herds dying sudden. It's the same pattern we saw in Bisbee." Emma felt her chest tighten. "The mine, Thomas." James nodded grimly. "Holloway's name came up too. Seems he and Watson are thicker than thieves. The railroad survey maps show a spur line cutting straight through all that land they're stealing." Emma's breath caught. "They'll sell to the railroad for a fortune, and bury anyone who gets in their way. The days grew darker. Strange riders circled the ranch at night, their laughter carrying on the cold wind. A dead calf was left at their gate, throat slit, the word leave carved into its hide. Emma buried it herself, while James stood guard, rifle across his chest, fury smoldering in his eyes. Yet amid the fear, something else grew. Emma found herself drawn to James in the quiet moments between threats, when he fixed the roof with steady hands, when he read Cal a story by lamplight, his deep voice filling the small cabin. She saw the loneliness etched in his face soften, saw the burden of his grief lighten when she touched his arm. One night, as snow whispered against the window, Emma lingered by the fire after Cal had gone to bed. James sat across from her, polishing his revolver with slow, methodical care. "You don't have to do this for me," she said softly. "You don't owe me anything." James looked up, meeting her gaze. "I owe you everything. You and that. Boy gave me back something I thought was gone." "What's that?" "Reason," he said simply. The word hung between them, fragile and fierce all at once. Emma felt her cheeks flush with warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. She wanted to answer, but the sound of a coyote's howl outside broke the spell, reminding them both that danger never slept out. The breaking point came a week later. James was in the south pasture, mending fence when gunshots cracked from the ridge. He dove behind a post as bullets tore the air. Emma screamed from the yard, dragging Cal into the cabin as splinters flew from the doorframe. James returned fire, his shots ringing across the valley. The attackers, 3 of Watson's men, their faces half hidden by bandanas, pulled back after a fierce exchange, riding hard toward town. When the silence fell, James stood in the doorway, smoke rising from his revolver, his chest heaving. Emma clutched Cal to her side, her face pale but resolute. "This won't end until one of us is dead," James said hoarsely. Emma stepped forward, placing a trembling hand on his arm. "Then we make sure it isn't you?" James looked at her, at the boy pressed close to her skirts, at the small cabin that had become their fragile sanctuary. And in that moment, the choice crystallized in his mind. He would not wait for Watson to come again. He would take the fight into town before the sheriff could tighten his grip any further. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It was here. The morning dawned sharp and gray, the kind of sky that promised snow before nightfall. The land stretched wide and brittle, the silence broken only by the cry of crows circling high above. James stood at the porch rail, staring out across the prairie. The rifle in his hands wasn't just a tool anymore. It was a promise. Emma stepped out behind him, wrapping her shawl tighter. Her eyes, shadowed with worry, sought his face. "You mean to ride into town?" James didn't look away from the horizon. "If I wait, Watson will burn this place to the ground. He's already tried. Next time, he'll succeed. I won't give him that chance." She laid a hand on his arm, her touch both pleading and grounding. "James, you can't stand against him alone. He has deputies, hired guns, half the town afraid of him." "That's why it has to be today," James said. His voice was calm, steady, the voice of a man who had seen war and learned not to flinch. "He doesn't expect me to come to him. If I can drag him into the open, expose him where the town has no choice but to see, then he loses." Emma's throat tightened. "And if you lose?" James finally turned, his pale eyes softening as they met hers. "Then at least I'll fall fighting for something worth standing for. For you, for Cal, for a future that doesn't belong to men like Watson." Emma couldn't speak for a long moment. Then, quietly but fiercely, she said, "You're not alone in this, James Whitlock. You never have been, not since the day you let me stay." He reached up, brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, and let his hand linger. "Keep Cal close. no matter what happens. By noon, James was riding into Coyote Ridge. The town buzzed with the restless energy of people who had already heard whispers of the barn fire, of the gunfight on the ridge, of Watson's men circling like wolves. Men leaned against posts. Women watched from windows. Children whispered behind skirts. They all knew something was about to happen. James dismounted in front of the saloon, tying Caesar to the hitching rail with deliberate calm. His spurs jingled on the boardwalk, his boots heavy against the creaking wood. He pushed through the swinging doors into the haze of tobacco smoke and whiskey fumes. The saloon went silent. Cards froze mid-play. Glasses paused halfway to lips. At the far end of the bar, Sheriff Watson leaned with his bandaged hand resting easy on the counter. Two deputies flanked him, their hands brushing the butts of their pistols. Well, Watson drawled, his smile sharp as a blade. Look what the wind blew in. The hero of the courthouse wedding. James's voice cut through the silence. Like a bell. This ends today, Watson. A low chuckle rippled through the room, though it carried no mirth. Ends? Oh, Whitlock, you're in over your head. You've got a ranch barely holding together, a widow with a boy who'll grow up, hungry, in a town that knows better than to cross me. Funny, James said evenly. From where I'm standing, looks like a man hiding behind thugs because he can't fight his own battles. The deputies stiffened, but Watson held up his good hand, smirking. You want to fight? Careful. What you wish for. The first shot cracked like thunder, and chaos erupted. One of the deputies went for his gun. Too slow. James's revolver barked, and the man crumpled to the sawdust floor. Patrons dove under tables. Women screamed. Glasses shattered as the saloon exploded into violence. Watson ducked behind the bar, firing wild. James dove for cover, a bullet splintering wood inches from his head. Smoke thickened the acrid tone of gunpowder stinging every breath. James rolled, firing twice more. The second deputy spun, clutching his chest, and collapsed. Watson cursed, snapping off a shot that grazed James's shoulder, the burn sharp and hot. James gritted his teeth, steadying his aim. Through the haze, he saw Watson's eyes, cold, calculating, furious. Outside, the town gathered. Word spread like wildfire, and soon the street was lined with people, their faces pale, their whispers rising like a tide. Emma stood among them. Cal clutched against her, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break free. She heard the gunshots, saw the flashes through the saloon's windows, smelled the smoke curling into the winter air. Every nerve in her body screamed to run inside, but she stayed rooted, knowing James would fight harder if he knew she was safe. The door burst open, one deputy staggering out before collapsing into the snow. Gasps swept through the crowd. Then silence, broken only by the distant clang of the church bell. Inside, the gunfire slowed. Two men now. One lawman, one ex-soldier, circling through smoke and ruin. You can't win, Whitlock. Watson's voice rang harsh. I've got men across this town. Every family owes me something. You kill me, they'll hunt you like a dog. James crouched behind an overturned table, his revolver heavy but steady in his grip. His voice came back cold. Maybe, but at least they'll know the truth. Watson fired again, the bullet thudding into wood. James sprang up, his body moving on instincts forged in war. He fired once, twice. The first shot shattered a bottle inches from Watson's head, glass raining down. The second tore through Watson's arm, spinning him backward against the bar. Watson roared, his pistol falling from his ruined hand. He lunged anyway, crashing into James with the force of a man possessed. The two went down hard, fists and fury, replacing bullets. James felt the sheriff's weight, smelled whiskey and sweat, saw the madness in his eyes. Watson clawed for the knife at his belt, but James's knee drove into his gut, forcing a grunt of pain. They rolled across the floor, men shouting from behind overturned tables, the whole town holding its breath outside. With a final surge, James wrenched the knife from Watson's grip and pressed it against his throat. "End it?" Watson spat, blood streaking his teeth. "Do it, Whitlock. Be the killer they say you are." The saloon fell silent, every eye fixed on the two men. James's hand trembled, fury and memory colliding inside him. The war, the graves, the barn fire, Emma's fearful eyes. He wanted to finish it. Lord help him. He wanted to end it all. But slowly he forced the knife away. "No," James said, his voice raw. "I won't dirty my soul with yours." He hauled Watson to his feet, twisting the sheriff's arms behind him. "Your reign is over." Dragging Watson out into the daylight, James threw him into the snow at the feet of the townsfolk. Gasps rippled through the crowd as they saw their sheriff broken, bloodied, and beaten. Emma stepped forward, her face pale but steady. Cal clung to her skirts, wide-eyed. "People of Coyote Ridge," James's voice rang out, carrying to the farthest edges of the street. "This man has poisoned wells, burned barns, and murdered to steal land for himself and his partners. How much longer will you let him rule you with fear?" Murmurs rose, swelling into shouts. Martha Henderson stepped forward, her weathered face blazing. "He poisoned our well. He stole our land." Pete Cleary added, "He killed my cattle, left me with nothing." Others followed, voices rising like a tide, breaking free of the dam. The people had seen enough. Fear began to crumble under the weight of truth. Judge Thorne pushed through the crowd, his robes flapping in the wind. He looked down at Watson, then at James, then at the townsfolk. "Sheriff Watson," he declared, his voice solemn and strong, "you are under arrest for conspiracy, arson, and murder. You will face trial before federal authorities." Watson laughed bitterly, blood spattering the snow. "You think this changes anything? Holloway will bury you all." James looked at him, then at Emma, then at the crowd that now stood united. "Maybe," he said, "but not today." Snow began to fall, soft flakes drifting down as if to cleanse the blood and soot. The people watched as Watson was dragged away in shackles, his curses fading into the distance. For the first time in years, the air in Coyote Ridge felt lighter. James stood in the street, his arm bleeding, his breath ragged. Emma ran to him, pressing a trembling hand to his wound. "You're hurt," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "I'm standing," James said, managing a faint smile. His eyes softened as he looked at her and Cal. "That's enough." Around them, the town stirred with a new energy. Fear had given way to courage, despair to defiance. The storm had broken, and for the first time, sunlight pierced through. Snow still covered the streets of Coyote Ridge when the federal marshal arrived 3 days later. His name was Eli Carver, a broad-shouldered man with weathered skin and a badge that gleamed cold against his duster. He came not alone, but with 4 deputies from Cheyenne, men who looked like they had ridden long miles through worse than winter. Their presence drew half the town into the street. Everyone eager to see what would become of Sheriff Watson. James stood at the edge of the edge. Boardwalk, his shoulder bandaged, his arm held stiff against his side. Emma was beside him, Cal clutching her hand. Together, they watched as Watson was dragged out of the jailhouse in chains. His swagger was gone, replaced by sullen silence. Marshal Carver's voice carried across the gathering. "By order of the Territorial Court, Sheriff Elias Watson is remanded into custody for trial on charges of murder, arson, and conspiracy. He will be transported to Cheyenne to stand before a federal judge." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Some jeered openly. Others still shaken, whispered like those who had seen a ghost finally bound. Emma gripped Cal's hand tighter. She could hardly believe it. The man who had sneered at her in the dusty spur, who had threatened her life and sought to ruin everything she had left, now stood shackled like the criminal he was. Watson turned his head, his gray eyes scanning the crowd until they found James. For a heartbeat, the two men locked stares. Then Watson spat into the snow. "Enjoy your victory, Whitlock. Holloway won't let you keep it." The marshal shoved him forward, and Watson stumbled, chains clanking. Swallowed by the deputy's formation, that evening the saloon buzzed with talk louder than any Saturday night. For the first time in years, laughter didn't sound forced, and men didn't look nervously toward the door, expecting Watson's shadow. James didn't join them. He sat at the table in the ranch kitchen, his arm in a sling, the lamplight flickering across his scarred face. Emma poured coffee and set it before him, the steam rising between them. "You should be resting," she said softly. "I've rested enough," James replied, though his body betrayed exhaustion. He studied her for a long moment. "Emma, I need to ask, do you regret it? Standing with me, marrying me in that courthouse?" Her lips parted in surprise. "James, after everything, tell me true," he pressed. "I dragged you into a fight with a man who would have burned the world to ash to keep power. I made you a target." Emma reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "You gave me more than a name, James. You gave me safety when no one else would. You gave me a chance to stop running." Her voice trembled but steadied. "I don't regret it, not for a moment." The silence between them stretched, warm instead of strained. James lowered his gaze to their joined hands, then lifted it again. "I thought I'd buried my life with the war, buried my future. But you and that boy," he shook his head, "you remind me there's still something worth living for." Emma felt her throat tighten. "And you remind me there's strength in more than survival, that it's not weakness to let someone stand with you." They sat that way for a long while, the snow falling soft against the windows, the ranch holding them safe in its walls. In the days that followed, Judge Thorne called the townsfolk together in the church hall. It was the only building large enough to hold them all, its pews crowded with farmers, miners, ranch hands, wives, and widows. Emma sat near the front, Cal leaning against her side. James stood at the back, preferring to watch with his steady soldier's gaze. "Neighbors," Judge Thorne began, his voice solemn, "we've lived too long under fear. Elias Watson is gone, but his corruption ran deep. Land stolen, lives ruined, families scattered. If we are to heal, we must reckon with it." One by one, the people spoke. Martha Henderson rose, her voice trembling with anger as she told of the poisoned well. Pete Cleary stood, fists clenched, as he spoke of his cattle slaughtered overnight. Others followed, men and women whose losses formed a chain of grief stretching across the valley. When silence finally fell, Judge Thorne gestured to the back. "James Whitlock, come forward." James hesitated, then stepped down the aisle, the boards creaking under his boots. All eyes followed him, some wary, some grateful. He stopped at the front, his hat in hand. "I didn't come here to lead anything," James said. "I came here to forget the war, to raise cattle and keep my ghosts quiet, but I couldn't stand by while Watson bled you dry." He paused, his pale eyes sweeping the crowd. "You don't need a hero. You just need to stand together. Watson's gone, but Holloway's reach is long. If you let fear split you apart again, someone else will take his place. If you stand firm, there's not a man alive who can break you." The hall was still. Then Martha Henderson rose again, her voice strong. "He's right. We've bowed long enough. It's time we took our town back." A murmur of agreement rippled through the pews, growing louder until it was a roar. For they. First time, Emma saw something kindle in their faces. Hope. At night, when the hall emptied and the town quieted under the falling snow, James walked Emma and Cal home. The lantern light swung in his hand, casting long shadows across the white. Cal skipped ahead, humming a tune. "Do you think it will last?" Emma asked softly. James glanced at her. "What?" "This hope, this courage. Or will they slip back into fear once Holloway sends word?" James thought for a long moment before answering. Fear doesn't vanish overnight. But once a people see they can fight back, once they taste freedom, it's hard to chain them again. He looked at her with quiet intensity. "That's what you gave them, Emma. Not me. You." She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Me?" "James, You stood when everyone else turned away. You spoke truth when it could have cost you everything. Don't underestimate what that means." She looked away, blinking against sudden tears. For so long she had been nothing more than a widow, a burden, a shadow. Now James's words carved something new in her heart, the possibility that she was more. The following week, a letter arrived. Judge Thorne read it aloud in the town square. "James Holloway, mine owner and land baron, hereby denies all knowledge of Sheriff Watson's actions and disavows responsibility. Any suggestion of his involvement is slanderous and will be met with legal retaliation." The words dripped with arrogance, but James only folded his arms, a grim smile touching his lips. "He's rattled," he said. "If he weren't, he wouldn't bother answering." Emma felt a chill. "He won't let it go." "No," James agreed, "but neither will we." That night, after Cal had gone to bed, Emma lingered by the fire. James sat across from her, sharpening his knife in silence. The lamplight flickered across the lines of his face, the scar along his jaw, the gray at his temples. He looked older than his years, but stronger too. "James," Emma said quietly. He looked up. "Do you ever think about what comes after?" He tilted his head. "After what? After Watson's trial? After Holloway's reckoning? After the fight is over?" James set the knife down, considering her. "I never used to. I figured my life ended at the war. Everything after was borrowed time." His gaze softened. "But lately, yeah, I think about it. A ranch with more cattle, maybe wheat in the Northfield. Cal learning to ride proper. And you, Emma, not carrying the world alone anymore." Her breath caught. The image was so simple, so ordinary, yet it struck her with the force of a revelation. A life, a real life. Not just survival. James leaned forward, his voice low. "I can't promise peace, not in a land like this. But I can promise I won't run. Not from Holloway, not from my ghosts, not from you." Emma's eyes stung with tears, but she smiled. "That's enough, James. That's more than enough." The prairie lay silent outside, the snow a clean sheet under the moon. In the little ranch house, the fire burned low, but warmth filled the room, not from the flames, but from something harder to name. The storm had not yet passed. Holloway still loomed. But for the first time, Emma believed they could weather it together. And in that fragile belief was the seed of something she had thought lost forever. Hope not only for survival, but for love. The winter finally broke in March. The thaw came slowly, dripping from eaves and softening the hard-packed earth until mud replaced snow. Wagons once more rolled along the ruts of Main Street and Coyote Ridge, and children's laughter returned to alleys that had echoed too long with silence. It was in this season of rebirth that the trial reached its climax. Word arrived by telegraph from Cheyenne. Sheriff Elias Watson had been convicted on all counts: murder, conspiracy, and abuse of office. His sentence would be life in the territorial prison, a fate he had once consigned so many others to through his corruption. When Judge Thorne read the verdict aloud in the courthouse, the townspeople erupted into applause. Farmers pounded one, another on the back. Widows who had lived under Watson's leering watch wept openly. Children cheered without understanding, simply sensing the release of long-held fear. Emma sat in the front pew with Cal at her side, her hands trembling as, though the chains had been lifted from her own wrists. She caught James's gaze across the room. His expression was unreadable at first, but then, slowly, he tipped his hat toward her. She understood. The danger from Watson was ended. But a larger shadow still loomed. James Holloway. In the days that followed, rumors swirled. Holloway had left his mine interests to a foreman and retreated to Denver. Some said he was untouchable, protected by governors and judges. Others whispered he would strike back at Coyote Ridge in subtler ways, through money and influence. Emma often saw James brooding on the porch, eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting riders. She knew his soldier's instincts never rested. But one evening, when the sun was bleeding red across the plains, he took a deep breath and came inside, with a different look in his eye. "I've been thinking," he said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "We've spent months waiting for the next fight, waiting for the next blow. But a man can't build a life on waiting for war." Emma put aside her sewing and looked at him carefully. "And what do you want to build, James?" He crossed the room, his boots slow and deliberate on the wooden floor. When he stopped in front of her, his shadow fell over the chair and his pale eyes softened. "A home," he said simply, "not just a roof and four walls. A home with laughter in it, with family, with you." Emma's breath caught. For a long moment, she could only stare at him, hearing the quiet thunder of her own heart. James. He sank to one knee before her, uncharacteristically clumsy, his broad hand reaching for hers. "I know I don't have pretty words, and I know I carry scars that will never heal. But I love you, Emma Harper Whitlock, you and that boy. If you'll let me, I want to be more than your protector. I want to be your husband in truth, not just by a line in a ledger." Tears filled her eyes. All the pain of Bisbee, all the loneliness of her wandering months, all the nights she had whispered prayers for a place to belong, it all came rushing back, only to be answered here, in the warmth of his rough voice. She squeezed his hand tightly. "You already are, James. From the moment you stood beside me in that courthouse, you were mine, and I was yours." The spring brought a wedding not of convenience, but of love. The church bell rang across the valley as townsfolk filled the pews, eager for a joy that belonged to them as much as the couple. Martha Henderson stitched Emma a gown of cream muslin, with lace trim. Pete Cleary offered his fiddle to lead the hymns. Doris McKenna, newly employed as Judge Thorne's court clerk, stood proudly among the women, her voice strong in the choir. Cal served as best man, his chest puffed with pride, as he carried the ring. When Emma walked down the aisle, sunlight streaming through the stained glass, James's eyes shone brighter than she had ever seen. Their vows were simple, spoken in steady voices that trembled only at the edges. But when James kissed Emma before the congregation, the applause thundered loud enough to shake the rafters. Afterward, on the church steps, Judge Thorne raised his hands for silence. "Today, we don't just celebrate a marriage. We celebrate a town reborn. Out of loss, out of corruption, out of fear, comes new life. May this union remind us all that love is the strongest justice of all." Life on the Whitlock Ranch shifted with the seasons. Emma took to her duties as naturally as if she had always been there, cooking hearty meals, keeping the ledgers balanced, and tending to the chickens she insisted on keeping. Cal learned to ride under James's patient instruction, falling off more often than staying on, but laughing every time James seemed lighter somehow. the haunted edge softening as laughter returned to the house. He still kept his rifle close, still patrolled the fence lines with a soldier's vigilance. But when he came back to the fire each evening, Emma saw something new in his eyes. Peace. One night, as the summer cicadas sang outside, Emma told him quietly, "I think Thomas would have liked you." James reached for her hand. "And I think Catherine, my sister, would have liked you too. She always told me I needed someone who saw through my silence." They shared that silence then, but it was no longer emptied out by autumn. The valley thrived. Farmers replanted in fields once abandoned. The railroad confirmed its spur line through Coyote Ridge, promising prosperity for those who had once been driven out. Families returned, their wagons creaking back over the ridges, bringing children and laughter with them. At the dedication of the new station, James and Emma stood side by side as the governor praised the courage of ordinary people who had stood against corruption. The crowd cheered when Judge Thorne spoke of a widow's defiance and a soldier's resolve. But it was Cal who stole the moment. Climbing onto the platform, he piped in his clear young voice, "Mama says this is our home now. And Mr. Whitlock, Pa, says no one can take it away again." The roar of laughter and applause carried across the plains. Emma flushed, but James simply lifted the boy onto his shoulders, grinning wider than Emma had ever seen. That evening, when the lanterns were lit and the house filled with the smell of cornbread and roasted chicken, Emma stepped outside. A prairie stretched endless beneath a violet sky, stars pricking the horizon. James followed her, slipping an arm around her waist. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "It's ours," he replied. She leaned against him, her heart full. "We made it through, James. Somehow we made it through." He kissed her temple. Softly, "We didn't just make it through, Emma. We built something better. For us, for him." He nodded toward the window where Cal's laughter rang. She closed her eyes, savoring the moment, the solidity of his arm around her, the quiet strength of his presence. This was the ending she had never dared dream of. Not riches, not power, but love and belonging. The next Sunday at church, after the sermon, Judge Thorne rose once more. His voice carried warm and firm. "Neighbors, let us remember this. It wasn't a badge that saved this town. It wasn't a gun or a gavel alone. It was the courage of a woman who refused to be shamed, and the heart of a man who refused to walk away. Let their story be told, so our children know that justice and love can both bloom in the harshest soil." The congregation murmured agreement, many turning to smile at James and Emma. She felt heat rise in her cheeks, but James only reached for her hand, threading his calloused fingers through hers. That night, lying in the narrow bed that had once scandalized a town, but now stood in the center of a home filled with peace, Emma whispered into the darkness, "James, do you think this will last?" He pulled her close, his voice low against her hair. "As long as we keep choosing it, every day. That's all a man can promise." And she smiled, her heart steady, because she knew he meant it. The prairie wind swept across the land, carrying with it the scent of harvest and the murmur of families rebuilding. In a ranch house lit with lamplight, a widow and a soldier found not only justice, but the love that gave it meaning. The story of James and Emma would be told in Coyote Ridge for years to come, of the widow who dared say that's perfect when the world offered her scraps, and of the cowboy who answered with action, building not just a ranch, but a future got and together. As stars filled the vast western sky, they began their forever.